Good morning, McCrag. It's Jack,
And Tony.
and we're just coming to you from the internet, and hoping to find you all well out there in the land of McCrag, and starting on. I guess we'd call this formally episode 1, as I called our trial episode, episode 0. So this will be episode 1, coming at you of a podcast pretty much focused on 40K and the general 40K universe. We might dabble into a few other things here and there, but fundamentally we're going to be focused on the world of Warhammer 40,000.
Right. Fundamentally, this is going to be a podcast about two guys talking about their favorite hobby. That's really what it comes down to.
That's absolutely. I'll blab on and on here and there about, Necromunda and all the other GW games because I like a lot of them, but I'm really enjoying 9th edition and really having a lot of fun rolling dice. So that'll be where most of my focus is.
Right. And same thing.
So, and with that in mind, let's think about what we are doing lately for Warhammer and general hobbying. So most of my hobbying over the last few weeks has been, I've been dabbling in sort of a super secret project about...
that you're about to release on the internet?
Maybe. So I've been slowly collecting and building and putting together some Black Templars. And in the same vein as Sisters of Battle, I'm drawn to them because they're sort of the opposite of who I am. So I'm not a very religious person. I'm not a very, I'm a fairly middle of the road sort of guy. But Black Templars and Sisters are like religious fanatics and totally nuts. And I like the idea of sort of playing a different character on the battlefield. So I've been poking away at a few models, but I've thought about this a lot, and one of the things I feel like when I get involved in a project is I tend to see it in the short term, and I rush through it, and a bunch of things get sloppy, and then I finish, and I never go back and touch up those things I say I'm going to go back and do. So what I'm embracing here, or trying to embrace, is the love of the hobby over the long term. So individual models with individual character over the long term, while still, doing my typical crazy amount of hobby speed on armies that, like my orcs when I add to it. But I'll be poking away at Black Templars, I think, kind of in secret for a while without, kind of crafting a specific army list. I'll probably just look at it unit by unit and not even at a points level, just unit by unit.
Okay. That's, to me, very alien in the sense of looking at an army unit by unit as you build up. Because I almost always go the opposite. I will, look at the rules. I'll look at what they're doing. I got to like the overall theme of the army, and I got to like what I can do with the army before I commit. But once I commit, I'll draw up a list, a 2,000 point list, and that's my shopping list.
Yeah, and I'm often thinking like that. Like I buy a bunch of stuff and I think, what's the list I'm going to buy? And I thought about that when the Orc Beast Snagas came out, and the Beast Snagas were released, and I had a list already in my head, and I bought that list, and then I never even opened them. So
that's a fact of life in the hobby there, Jack.
It is. And am I planning on doing the Beast Snaga boys? Of course. I love the theme. I like the idea of a big game, high toughness, high, going after models that are bigger and tearing down knights and all. I love all of that. I like the vehicle that is functionally a Weird Boy tower that used to exist in like Epic. but now it's being drawn by a gargantuan super squig thing. I love all that, but I just didn't. I bought all this stuff and then just never really embraced anything in the project. So, but the thing about orcs is I can blast through orcs when I settle into it. I can, you're batch painting 10, 20 orcs at a time, and then, but the difference with the Templars is each model can really be a unique model, and can be crafted differently. And I just want to poke away at it for like a year, 2 years, and just enjoy it, because I feel like often you burn out and then you aren't enjoying the hobby part as much as you could. And especially me, I burn out so quickly. I start a project and then I shut down for a month and don't do anything. So I think that having, a couple projects going, like this Black Templars project that I'm starting, plus having orcs that I can just kind of go crazy with and not worry about. And then as a refresh, I have some Necromunda models, and Necromunda is a great game, but it also gives you, unique characters that paint up actually pretty quickly and in isolation that can allow you to refresh your thinking and sort of refresh your whole backlog and stuff like that. So that's kind of where my head is and where my hobby is right now.
All right. I don't know. For me, when I'm painting, it takes forever to paint anything. So like everything is a struggle to go through. So I don't have that kind of passion to be like, I want to make every person in this list like their own individual. It's like, nope. Unless you are a character, you are part of the faceless horde, even if I can see your face.
Yeah. And so I've thought that way for a long time. I've always been a big helmet on head guy because of that. I don't want to paint your face. I don't want to worry about highlighting your nose. But lately I've been shifting a little bit to look for personally. I mean, a lot of people find enjoyment in a lot of different ways, but my enjoyment has always come from the hobby aspect primarily and the playing aspect secondarily. And so I want to do a project that really embraces the hobby, green stuff and conversion work and all that, like to the nines, which is the stuff I really love. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause like, I'm like the opposite. I'm the opposite. The game is by far much more enjoyable to me than the hobby. And there are times when, I've done some green stuff and things like that. But I also like, for me, the ability where if I plop down a fully painted army on the table, that, it looks good, but more importantly, at least for me, that my opponent can look at those models, and so long as they're pretty much familiar with 40K, they'll be able to instantly recognize, it's, like Dark Angels. They look like Dark Angels. They're painted like Dark Angels, what have you, and everything's WYSIWYG. That's about like the extent of where I'm willing to go. So I'm not like going crazy on the hobby aspect to change them up or something like that. Is not something that's usually a goal unless it's a one of a kind model, or something like a knight, right? Like something that you just spent $150 on. You kind of want it to be special, assuming you can make it more special than what the model already looks like, because for those bigger models, they're already pretty much fantastic.
I agree, except I don't know if you've seen people posting up pictures of those new gigantic super dragons that just came out for Age of Sigmar. But so there's a consistent error with one specific part that joins the scales from sort of the top part of the shoulder to the arm, or somewhere in there, where either there wasn't enough plastic in the injection molding, or there was some sort of error in the molding itself, but there's a gap, and you can see clearly that it's supposed to be the transition scales from one type of scale to another. and it's missing for like like a quarter inch or something like that, where that you can be like, oh wow, that and it's the same in enough different pictures that you know it's not just a one-off fluke to one person or another, that there's something going on with the injection.
Oh, I mean, I know that they've had problems in the past, but generally especially the plastic and especially anything modern has been pretty much spot on. That's like the first time I've heard of any of their plastic stuff, like a mistake.
Well, I mean, I've definitely had the one or two off model with like some injection, where like one part maybe didn't get a full-on injection here and there. I'd say it's probably happened 2 or 3 times over my life of the hobby. And I know that Finecast wasn't very well received generally.
Oh, that's different. Finecast is garbage, and if you go to Forge World, anything of their older Forge World stuff, you think of like their versions of the Land Raider.
Oh yeah,
especially how do you put it? Like the Typhoon, those type of models, or God forbid, their planes.
Oh my goodness, a Storm Eagle, awful.
Yeah. So like, they're not perfect by any means, the company. However,
they've always
like with the plastic, and especially say plastic made within the last 5 to 6 years, has generally been very solid.
Very solid. I'd say this is their first major error, a consistent sort of error, right? Not just a one-off, one sprue didn't get it, but it seems like a whole selection of them did. There was some sort of mistake. I guess you call that, an old boss I used to have said, it's okay to make mistakes, but, be very careful for your errors. And errors are a little bit bigger and longer lasting. So, and I think this is one of those for GW. That said, their plastics and their characters have been just spot on across the board. If you look at the Templar range in general, all of that is beautiful. The Beast Snagger range in general. There are a couple models here and there that I dislike a couple small aspects of, but in general, the plastics are just tremendous.
I agree. I definitely agree. And especially, the bigger stuff, or even some of the smaller stuff, like a normal average infantry character. But in general, all the big stuff is pretty solid and amazing.
Yeah, and if we're looking, 40K has seen the lion's share of the last year of the release schedule, which is surprising because we got the whole new Age of Sigmar edition, and we finally got the Stormcast models and the dragons and all of the orc, what are they called? The sneaky gut rippers or whatever they are. Mm-hmm. But there hasn't been another Age of Sigmar release, which I find very interesting, that 40K is still dominating the release schedule when you just had an edition change. So I'm wondering if that will see a shift come 2022.
Well, they must still be impacted by COVID, because, even now, you were talking like a year and a half in, almost 2 years in, they just recently delayed the release of the codexes.
Correct.
For Gene Stealers and Custodes. So they're still impacted,
right,
with their production line. And that's probably going to keep continuing for probably at least another year, or however long COVID's going to stay around with us.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of shifts us over to some of the stuff that's upcoming. Like, we know there's a Custodes box with the Gene Stealer cults, and we know Tau are right on the horizon, but we're getting models, but we're not getting the books, which is a big sort of highlight as to the distribution troubles that are occurring right now. That they are getting wherever the plastics are all made in England. So they're getting that stuff out, but the books are typically not printed in England. So those books coming from various spots seem to be held up everywhere. So we're getting all these cool units, getting these new custodians and these new Gene Stealer cultists, but we're not going to be able to actually see them play until that book comes out. So that'll be interesting to see because, the Gene Stealer cults really need a new book to sort of be at all taken seriously. And it seems like they're going to get some really cool, interesting rules, like about outflanking and crossfire and all that neat stuff. But we won't see that.
We can get into that after we talk about the hobby and the follow-up thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, with the hobby, on my end, I actually just kind of finished a decent chunk of stuff.
Oh, really?
Since we talked about episode 0 and today. So I finished Mortarion.
Ooh.
And gave that up to my friend that I painted it for. So that's done. I finished 30 Necron Warriors.
Oh, that's a lot.
So now, like, my total is 40 with them, which is what I was aiming for. So that's done. And 5 Blade Guard, Deathwing Blade Guard. So that's all done.
Oh.
So now it's just, I think the thing on my table right now is I'm going to do a Necron Overlord, the one with the scythe and holding a resurrection orb.
Okay.
And a Royal Warden, one of the new ones. It looks like basically a pimped out immortal.
Okay.
I'm going to knock those out. So that way my Necron force is done. I have a Necron force that's done, fully painted, and I'm very pleased with. So I should have that done by the end of the week.
Oh, wow. So are you going with 2 big blobs of 20 warriors?
Right. And a smaller blob of like 5 immortals or something like that to hold some backline objective.
Okay. Very nice.
Speaking of that, I want to do a little bit of like follow up from going from our first episode, or episode 0, is that I mentioned at the time, probably somewhere midway through, where, Necrons have this problem of, there's only like 5 units that have core keyword in their codex, and it's largely down, I don't want to say ideological lines, but kind of like mini sub-faction lines, right? You're either corrupted with a destroyer virus, so all those units don't get core, and then you have units that are canoptic in nature, your spiders, your wraiths, and things like that, and thus they don't get core, and then obviously anything that's like a vehicle or character. So there's a lot of stuff that don't have core, and thus you miss out on a lot of buffs and a lot of power. Well, I think a few days afterwards, because we were thinking, at the time I was thinking, oh no, they'll never change it because it makes sense lore-wise why this is. Well, yeah, sure enough, a few days later, GW puts out this update.
The Balance Dataslate.
Yes, they put out this Balance Dataslate that made some sweeping changes to a good chunk of the armies in 40K, and Necrons being one of them. And the Necron change specifically was add the core keyword to the following units. And it's pretty much anything that is infantry and not, a character, right? So
yeah.
It's much more in line with most of the other codexes.
Correct.
And that opens up a tremendous amount of abilities, right? Because now I can easily resurrect canoptic units. I can resurrect destroyers, right?
Yes.
Both the Scorpic destroyers or even just regular destroyers.
Yep.
So even the Locust heavy destroyers, granted, I don't see anybody taking them, but
Right.
they're a cool looking model, but you could resurrect those, and
Right.
they're huge.
So, flayed ones, are those also? I know they got the core, but can they get resurrected?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. So the Necrons have a Technomancer, and a Technomancer he can buff canoptic units, but more specifically, I should say, it's like a medic, right? It does
Okay.
what an apothecary can do. And unlike an apothecary, it does it for free.
Oh, okay.
And there's ways that you can do it twice.
Oh, wow.
So not only does it do it for free, or at the cost of the model, and a Technomancer is like 75 points base. So it can usually is probably going to be doing it cheaper than a Primaris apothecary or even a regular apothecary.
Right.
That if it does it to warriors specifically, you don't just bring back one model.
Right.
You bring back D3.
Oh, okay.
So it's much more oomph in that regard, which is good. But now, instead of just doing essentially, you could only really do, Lich Guard, Warriors, and Immortals, and maybe like the bikers that they had, their
Right.
little jet bikes.
Yeah, I love those models.
Now you can bring back Wraiths. Wraiths got a 4-up invul. You can bring up the Scorpec destroyers or destroyers in general, right? Like 45-point models that are much, much, much more dangerous than, I brought back 2 warriors.
Right. That's interesting.
But yeah, there's all kinds of bonuses. I'm actually going to field the named, kind of like a super cryptek, where Illuminator, I want to say Illuminator Cesras, but I could be wrong, where he's the one that got like a new kit where it looks like he's draining blood from somebody that's on the ground.
Oh, right. That during the Psychic Awakening books, yeah.
Right. So he's a little bit more expensive than 2 crypteks, but by default, he can res 2, he can do the resing to 2 models in the same command phase. That's also kind of the downside. They have to do it in the command phase. But you can also, he gives the ability to grant a permanent buff to a unit once per game. So you roll a dice, a D3, and he can increase their strength, increase their ballistic skill, or increase their toughness, right? Depending on the die. And you just do that, and that's a permanent buff, and they get that for the rest of the game.
Right. That's great. Yeah. So adding that core keyword really does make Necrons a much more potentially dangerous army in a competitive setting now.
Yes. At least in my opinion, it's too soon to tell. I think in November there was, at least around here, there wasn't a lot of tournaments, but now at least in December, late November and early December, there's a bunch more local tournaments. So there's starting to see them more often. Whether or not they're winning, who knows?
Right.
How much they're going to change up the meta, who knows? But I think that they always had the power. It's just a matter of getting that power to the right units, and now it's much easier to do so with the core keyword.
Correct. And so in the time between the episode 0 and now, we had talked about the idea that we were expecting some sort of changes for the Drukhari, Admech, and Orcs, simply because of the way they've been dominating. And we did, in this Balance Dataslate, get some points changes to Admech and Drukhari to make them a little bit more, we could call it just they got a little bit of a hit with the nerf hammer a little bit, and orcs can only take one unit of each of the following buggies, right? The Boomdag, the Snaz Wagons, the Custom Booster Blaster, the Megatrek Scrapjacks, the Squig Buggies, and the Dragsters. So you can only take one unit, which is still 3 of those buggies each. So gone are these 9 total of the best buggy, and gone are and there's the aircraft model where you can only have 1 if you're doing an incursion or combat patrol, 2 if you're doing a strike force, or 3 for onslaught. So even if you're doing a 3,000 point game, basically you're getting a 1 plane or 1 aircraft model for each 1,000 points. So they kind of pulled back on some of these things they were seeing that were, for the Eldar or the Drukhari. I know that their jets are super, super powerful, but orcs with the freebooter keyboard being able to shoot and hit all of those shots more effectively, it just sort of kind of pulled everything back a little bit, tightened everything up to make everything a little bit. Again, I don't think it's so much a major nerf to armies so much as it is a rebalancing to give those lower armies access to the like a bit more balance.
Right. I would agree with that. And like the thing with the aircraft, though, it's kind of like the game, at least in my opinion, is definitely more of like a ground game that happens to have planes. And the thing with the planes is that they're either not really that great, and thus nobody takes them, or they're immediately oppressive and just, they got to be nerfed to the ground or else everyone takes planes. The thing with the planes is that, everyone else is generally moving maybe anywhere from 6 to 12 inches, generally around 6. And the planes can move, 50 plus inches. And if they got some solid shooting, especially if you got like freebooters and all of a sudden you got, I got a vehicle that has the output of most orcs, but it's hitting on 4s, and I can hit you pretty much no matter where you are because I have a 50-inch move, and maybe I have like 3 of these bloody planes,
right?
It can start feeling a little bit oppressive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's the thing, just how powerful the freebooters army with that keyword makes everything else. It just takes an entire army. So part of the reason orcs have so much shooting is just because so little of it actually hits. But then when you have a way to change that across the army, it just becomes a little too good. And I'm surprised we don't see an actual change in the actual freebooter keyword. But and that might be a little too extreme, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be too extreme for this edition. I think like if they were going to change that, they would change that for next edition. Because we've seen stuff where like in 8th edition they've made certain change, like for example, like the infamous, I'm up 3 inches off the ground, or I'm on a rock or something like that. You're a monster or a bike or whatever. You can't get up here. You can't hit me.
Right.
And they backed that. They said, yes, that is how it is. Rules is written. And then here we are in 9th edition, and they changed it.
Correct.
So that way, that's, we can still engage you. We have a vertical engagement range now.
Right. Yeah, and I do like that change because I've just felt like I can't engage you because I can't get in base contact with you, but like I'm a knight and I can still blast the building down around you.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of knights, all knights got the ability to get control objectives and counting as 10 models instead of 1. So an armiger class are able to get the objective secured. And I think that's a game changer too, because I did play a knight's army with my orcs, and without that, those armigers, I would have won. But because he was even though I kept him off the objectives early, he was able to move on them late after he blasted me apart. And having that objective secured ability definitely makes knights much more viable.
Right. And, just to reiterate, the objective secured will come default on the Armiger class or like War Dog class.
Yes.
And those units count as 5 models. The big guys, anything with Titanic, is they count as 10 models, but they don't natively get the objective secure.
Correct.
But one thing also is that the objective secured rule, right, in terms of its interaction, basically if you have a unit that's objective secured and your opponent has a unit that's an objective secured, and you are now both of you are trying to contest for the same point. Once both of them are there, the objective secured model or the objective secured rule no longer matters. So as an example, say you got your armiger and you have, he counts as 5 models and objective secured. And the opponent comes in and he has, say, I don't know, like 3 intercessors. You're going to get it because even though you both have objective secured, you count as 5 models. Flip side would be, say, for example, that, same thing. You have your armiger and your opponent has 3 intercessors. But in addition to that, he also has, say, 3 eradicators, as an example. And eradicators are not objective secured. Your opponent would get the objective because both of you have objective secured, that kind of cancels each other out.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how many models you have that are objective secured. That doesn't matter.
Nope, it's just
the fact
unit.
Yeah, it's just that you both have them there. So now it goes back to how many models are there.
Right.
So now there's ways to get the Titans the ones with the Titanic keyword. There's ways to get them to have objective secured. I faced an opponent last weekend who brought a knight army, and he was able to give all 3 of the knights using a free blade list.
Oh.
So everything was a free blade. And that seems to have come from a fairly recent supplement in 9th edition where he can give objective secured, so long as he takes certain, burdens and the benefit traits. So long as he distributes these in a specific way, he can give those 3 objective secured. And then the knight, the armigers, he brought 2 armigers, they also get objective secured just because they're armigers.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that was, it didn't do too much, but he had like a 5-man army, which was nice, but that was a pretty close game. But it was one of those things where it's like, oh crap, you got a knight on there that's 10 models as objective secured. That's hard to push off, and especially for him, because everything counted as a character for the most part, or at least all the Titanic models. You can't just, they got heroic intervene, so you can't really just be like, oh, I'm just gonna come up and I'll sneak on that objective with an objective secured unit and try to hold it. No, he was just heroically intervening. All right, now you're gonna face either a bunch of stomps or whatever.
Right, and they're going to count as 10 models whether you have knocked them down to, like, if you've taken them from like 20 wounds to 15 wounds, or if you've taken them down to 5 wounds, like whatever it is, like they still count as 10 models until they're gone. And so that's like, and part of me wishes that it degraded like in sections, but that's not a balanced data slate. That's an entire amendment to the book. So
Right. And, who knows what's going to happen, because those books haven't come out yet.
right.
Right. So like some of these changes, like half of the major changes that they've done in this balanced data slate are for forces that have not come out yet. And, Chaos Space Marines, Astra Militarum, the Knights, for both Chaos and Imperial, they haven't come out yet.
No.
And I got a feeling that if they're doing this balance slate, and I could easily be wrong, that if they're doing this balance slate for those factions, then it's probably several more months before we see a codex.
Yes, because this came out November 9th. We were talking about this before we started recording, and it doesn't include Tau. It doesn't include Custodes. It doesn't include Genestealer cults, all of which are slated for books, the next 3 books. And so with the next 3 books not coming until 2022, we're probably looking until at least March before anything other than those 3 books are coming out.
Right. I would agree with that. So, especially stuff like Chaos Space Marines didn't get their 2 wound Space Marines, which I know a lot of people still want, which is understandable. But they did get their Death to the False Emperor expanded, so that way it's on any enemies. It doesn't matter if it's Imperium or not.
Yeah, I did play against some Chaos Space Marines, and I have to say, them being able to hit my orcs, to get the additional hit, it was a tiny bit frustrating, but not quite as frustrating as Be'lakor in general, who was just a beast and soaked up so much of my focus. If you're listening to this in the future, and you see Be'lakor, you know what? Just stay away from him and ignore him if you can, or feed him a big unit that takes him forever, because I focused so much on him that I ended up losing the game because I lost focus on the other things. I just threw everything at him. But he chews up war bosses just for fun.
You can ignore invols and all that good stuff, so he don't care. And I think, what was it? I think the favorite rule for him right now or favorite list right now is to throw him in a Slaneshi detachment. So that way, because he counts as Slanesh.
Yep.
You can grant him advance and charge. Because of the locus.
Yeah, so the first tournament I ran for 9th edition with Be'lakor had him added into a Slanesh list. So there ended up being like him and 2 other demon princes, or greater demons. And everyone was like moving, advancing, charging, and the guy that won, Nate Price, he was in everyone's face turn 1, and they just couldn't get through all of the Seekers and the greater demons and Be'lakor, and it was just a brutal, like nobody really was prepared for that turn 1 onslaught. So
then it doesn't help that in the fact that Slanesh is like an anti-melee army, because even if it was like, okay, say I went first and I am able to say I was a Blood Angels player and I'm able to go after you turn 1, maybe you deployed it in, right on the line, and I was able to make some long bomb charges. Say I charged 3-4 times, it doesn't matter. You still count as going first. So unless I have some way to nullify that off of you, I can't charge you with a heavy melee army all over the place, because we're still going to trade.
Correct.
Back and forth.
Yep.
Yep, it's definitely interesting. The other changes that they got, not Chaos Space Marines, but the Astra Militarum, they expanded their orders, right? Tank orders go to most vehicles now, for the exception of their Titanic units. So you can't give the Baneblades can't accept orders, but you could give orders to their artillery units that shoot out of line of sight.
Yes.
So that way they get rerolls.
Yes.
Which is nice. Speaking of their vehicles, the Lehman Russes now have a 2-up save. So even a Melta is, you still got a 6-up save.
Right. That's but it's also, a big old giant tank. So it makes sense to me.
I agree. And the other one that I see a lot more talk on is the whole, when they do a order, the order explodes to units that are around it. Now, it's not every order for infantry specifically, but you could do something like first rank, second rank, right? Get those extra shots, and you give that order to a unit, and it explodes to all these units that are nearby.
Okay.
That within 6 inches of that unit, and you can just, you don't need as many officers to give orders now. You can just order that unit in the middle, and all of a sudden you could get 2, 3, 4 units all of a sudden all getting first rank, second rank fire.
Right.
Or, bring it down or whatever.
Right. Fix bayonets. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when you look at this balance data sheet and you minus the armies that we know are coming next, I think this does give you a pretty solid idea of these are our band-aids to help everyone kind of get back into the fight. Because they're not getting anything anytime in the immediate future.
Right. And I also think they said that they were going to do this about once a quarter. Yep. So I wouldn't take any of this stuff as gospel, because they could do something like this and then find that, this had an adverse effect, and then remove the change. Right. And they've always had that, but they usually don't make changes that frequently.
Yeah. And I think, though, just maybe not over the last year, but in the past, the pace of releases has sort of set a tone for, if something is out of whack when a new codex comes out and it overtakes the tournament scene, right? You can't wait 4 to 6 months to balance that. Because it affects tournament play so drastically with all of these major tournaments happening, that I think that doing it quarterly will help keep a much healthier tournament environment, a much healthier tournament scene.
Right. I agree with that. And there's 2 noticeable things that are a little bit interesting on this. One, Drukhari, despite getting a good chunk of stuff nerfed points-wise, they are still doing very well in tournaments.
Right.
Very well. Probably still top dog, right? Or at the very least, 1 to 3. AdMech may have been dropped down to maybe top 5, but, they're still very good despite the point increase. And the second thing is that Grey Knights aren't on here at all. And they were doing very well, upwards close to Drukhari level prior to this coming out. So now, everyone else that was competing in that, the top 5 got, those armies got nerfed or, rebalanced a bit, whereas Grey Knights did not. That being said, Grey Knights have some stuff that's definitely going against them. Like, for example, they give up command points easily for Abhor the Witch, right? Whereas I don't think Drukhari has something that's like that, where you can just be like, oh, I can easily take this, and I'm guaranteed to get some points so long as I can knock off some of your models.
Right. Yeah, I don't know with Grey Knights so much. I did see an increase but I also wonder if, because the Grey Knights Codex was only out for a short time before this Balance Dataslate came out. So I wonder if they just didn't have enough information to make any changes, but I bet they'll be on the next one.
Yeah, I definitely think it'll be on the next one. I'm seeing, probably the last several tournaments I've gone to, Grey Knights and Drukhari are always top slots. Hell, even the last one I just went to, the last game was Drukhari versus Grey Knights.
That was the last event I ran. That was the top table.
Right. And I think out of like the 7 or 8 tournaments I've gone to in the past 2 months, Drukhari and Grey Knights are, either in first, second, or third slot for every single one of them. There's a local gentleman, I forget his name. I see him in most of the tournaments. He plays Drukhari and he wins every single tournament, even post rebalance. So he's a very good player and a nice guy, but he takes first spot every game. But yeah, but with like Grey Knights, I'm seeing personally the same thing over and over, where you're taking a lot of Nemesis Dread Knights, right? They're little baby walkers.
Yep.
And a lot of Inceptors. What their version of a jump troop.
Okay.
Right? And they're jump troops that don't have fly, but they have all the benefits of fly and none of the downsides.
Yeah, they have the little things on their backpacks, right? And that's the only thing that differentiates them. And they basically teleport around the battlefield.
Yeah, I want to call them Interceptors off the top of my head. But what they, because they are almost pretty much point for point, they're just strike squads with 12-inch movement or 10-inch movement or what have you. Much greater movement, but they are strike squads. So you can take them in huge units of 10, and you could even technically put them in a Rhino. I've seen some guys do that where they put them in a Rhino, whereas you can't do that with regular jump troops. But these guys are not technically jump troops,
right?
So you could stick them in a Rhino with no bulky, no problems there. So you have like these guys bring like at least 2, maybe 3 units of 10 of these guys. They also have a very easy secondary that they have access to where, so long as you're on some objectives, you have some guys do a psychic action and it's like a psychic action for like, 3 to cast or 4 to cast. And, they all cast it and they're able to get points that way.
Right. Yeah, I do wonder if Thousand Sons are going to be able to do any sort of real competition with Grey Knights for sort of psychic balance, because I was expecting in my mind, and I don't think that this has been borne out. I was thinking that Grey Knights and Thousand Sons releasing at about the same time would mean that they would both sort of hit with the same overall effect on the tournament scene, which is to shift a lot of the sort of psychic balance and make people take models that they may or may not have taken before, because it doesn't seem like a lot of people really worried about the psychic phase. But now people have to plan for it. But I think all you're planning for now is Grey Knights, and not so much the psychic phase. If that,
I haven't seen any Thousand Sons armies really doing well at all, if I've seen them in the tournaments at all. It's always been, the Grey Knights. I think that's, mainly because, even though they're both psychic heavy armies, obviously Thousand Sons has different units to do that. And you still have stuff like Iron Man, for example, that's a really nasty heavy hitter if you want him to be. Psychic wise, you can probably throw out, 10, 15 plus mortal wounds, depending on what you have him cast. And then obviously you can have Magnus in there as well.
Right. And
But
I've always thought that rules-wise, Mortarion was just more effective with Death Guard than Magnus was with Thousand Suns. But that that just could be the different aura abilities that Death Guard come with. I don't know. I felt like Mortarion was just an overall better choice than Magnus. So I wonder if that's changed.
yeah, I don't know if that's changed. I've definitely seen Mortarion more often, Death Guard more often, but I've also seen Death Guard armies without him. But Death Guard's whole thing is that they're just much more resilient. That universal -1 damage is definitely annoying and drastically reduces the change, or not drastically reduces the change, drastically reduces the effectiveness of firepower coming their way. So, anything with damage 2 gets nerfed in half. So
right. And that's one of the things that I found intriguing about the Beast Snaggers was it didn't matter what weapon you shot them with, you're only going to wound them on a 4+. So that's why I kind of had some excitement about the Beast Snaggers when they first came out. That sort of intrigued me. Like, oh, I'm going to go challenge a whole bunch of knights, and they're going to shoot me with their super heavy, gigantic weapons. But it doesn't really matter because they're only wounding me on a 4+ anyway.
right, but that's limited though. Correct me if I'm wrong. Those guys, that only works if it's not strength 8. If it's basically strength 7 or less, you have to wound them on 4s. But if it's strength 8 or higher, then it's normal, just like the ramshackle.
Oh, right. I'd have to look. I'd have to look at, because I think it's only specific to the Beast Snaggers. So I'd have to go into the basement and get my book and take a look.
Right, because the reason why I say that is because the last tournament last weekend, my first opponent was an orc player who was very heavy in Beast Snaggers. And he brought up that same thing, saying, oh, yeah, you're going to have to wound on 4s, but it's not nearly as cool as a rule as I would like to think it to be, because these guys are toughness 6. So if you're strength 8, it doesn't matter. But if they're strength 6, so if I'm shooting strength 6 weaponry at them, it's 4s anyways. It only matters for like plasma or autocannons, where they're strength 7.
Interesting. Well, let's see.
But yeah, that was an interesting game. And since I'm playing Ravenwing, so I have lots of plasma and lots of melta, so that had complications.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. So I forgot that I have my phone here. So that is true. It's 8+. So I had thought that it was better than the ramshackle rule. Alas, maybe it's not. So in my brain, it couldn't be the strength 8 because, right, the whole lore behind them is they go after the biggest things like knights and tanks. But knights and tanks have strength 8+ weapons. So I guess it's not all that good after all.
That's true. But they also usually have a lot of minor stuff as well. But at the same time, though, your T6 pretty much across the board, which is huge. Because even stuff like heavy bolters, no, I'm wounding you on 5s.
Yep.
Like you need assault cannons or better to be able to do any type of real damage against you.
Yeah.
And those beast snaggers have like 4 wounds each or something like that.
Any of the characters do. Yeah, they're like 4 or 5 wounds, but I think most beast snaggers. I just put my phone down. But I think they all have 1 wound. I just think they're tougher. Or maybe the beast snaggers have 2 wounds and the regular orcs have 1. I can't remember.
Well, I meant more the riders.
Oh, the squig hogs? Oh yeah, those are
Yes, yes,
those
yes.
have I think those have 4 wounds each. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, that is massively significant.
Yeah.
T6, 4 wounds. They take a lot to chew through.
They do. So, and ultimately, like, that's my hope. One of the things I'm noticing in general when I'm putting stuff together is how many more models these days are standing on one foot, including the beast snagas. And sometimes that's not great. Like,
I agree. I'm dealing with that with like Necrons. Not so much that they're standing on one leg, but they can be very fiddly. So it's and very thin and frail in certain areas. So like I'm not looking forward to the what is it, the new Catan that they put out when Necrons
oh yeah,
were updated in ninth. That the Void Dragon.
yeah.
I'm not looking forward to that at all.
No, that's it reminds me of, well, they've done a lot with their sort of their plastic technology ever since they did Night Haunt, but it reminds me of like Marvel Crisis Protocol. I don't know if you've ever put one of those models together, but they had the X-Men Storm like floating on her lightning bolts, and it like the contact points are so small, and putting her together was a nightmare. Like just trying to get her to balance on these like bolts of lightning, and I'm like, oh man, it was awful.
But I mean, that's what they're trying to do to make it so that way the model's very dynamic. So I can understand why they do it, but it's still, it's a pain.
It is. I think that I love the fact that we're moving to so many more unique and dynamic sculpts. It doesn't, though, sometimes something as simple as getting them to stay on the base becomes problematic. I think there just needs to be, I remember one of the beast snagas has one rear foot that connects, and you're talking like, an eighth of an inch of a contact point. It's just not enough based on the weight of the model. So, I'm probably going to have to drill, because it happened to both of them, and because I have 2 squads of 3, right? So it happened to both of the models with that foot. So I'll drill a pin it under the base, bend it over so it like hangs in there. So.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I've been doing for models that are like that, like really thin contact point, is especially if the other foot is up, I will put basically like rocks underneath that.
Right.
So that way I'll have that second contact on the rocks. That generally helps, but that's just my way of doing it.
Right. So, well, we're pushing into about an hour. So I want to shift our thinking over to talk a little bit about some of those gene stealers and those well, my brain shut off. The Custodes, because I'm excited about these books, not because I'm going to get another force, but just because it keeps adding. And I've also just read those 2 Servants of the Throne books with the Custodes and Sisters. And so I'm really excited about what they do with Custodes, because it's fresh in my brain, and I love to see how they make those interactions between the Sisters and the Custodes work.
I'm definitely hoping that it's definitely very integrated, that I don't get any downsides taking Sisters. Because right now the Sisters are very limited. Yes, they are expanding them a bit, but I definitely want to be able to take Sisters and not have any downsides with the Custodes in general, especially since there's going to be Sisters troops. So, the Sisters troops is probably going to be closer to like half the cost of a Custodes army, or sorry, a Custodes actual their custodian guard, which is like minimum cost 150, whereas like their troops are going to be probably closer to like 60 to 80 points.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting because so there's one unit right now. Well, there are 3 units, but it's one box that you can buy that makes 3 different Sisters units, right? So it's the sisters with the two-handed greatswords. It's the sisters with the flamers. It's the sisters with the bolters. And you have one character model currently that comes from the dual kit with the characters from the Black Library novels. So unless they add some other sort of, unless they add another way to get a character in there, it'll be interesting to see.
Right, and I think the character that they have given, other than Alea, right, and that's the named character from that box set you just mentioned, the character seems to come from the same kit that you just, the Vigilator kit that all the other kits come from for Sisters of Battle. So you just, basically redo the Sergeant model or something like that. You tool it, tool that model up.
So I wonder if it will follow the same trend as the Sword Brethren kit. So the Sword Brethren kit has 5 models in it, but the Sergeant, they have a wide range of various weapons, but the base unit size for Sword Brethren is 4, because you have the options to make a Castellan, like a lieutenant model, out of that kit. And so the unit size is 4 as a base, or it can be 5, or it can be 10, right? So I wonder if if they're going to allow you to make a character, I wonder if they make the unit sizes of one of those, either the elites or the troops or the, I think the other one might be fast attack. I wonder if they make them like a base size 4 for one of those units, so that then you build a commander or a hero or a character, and then you're left with 4. So then you take that particular unit, just like they did with the Sword Brethren for the Black Templars.
Right. I don't know what they'll end up doing, but
because one of the things that GW does now, and you can see it with the new kill team, is if you buy a single box, and that has to be a full unit, or like break up into 2 full units, right? So if they have to have a way to, or that's the trend they've been doing. So I'm kind of fascinated by it, because I didn't realize the Sword Brethren was a 4-man starting unit until I started assembling them. And then I was like breaking down the rules a little bit, and I was like, wait a minute, this is different, because they give you the rules for the Castellan as a build option. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought they released a Castellan model. Well, they did, but they also give you a choice to make a Castellan from the Templars box, the Sword Brethren box. So it's very unique. And I wonder if that's a trend that we'll see with more units.
Possibly. Definitely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
So,
but I'm definitely psyched with the new Custodes coming. I'm definitely going to try to get the box set, if possible. I want that new, like their super champion, essentially.
Right.
But I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the rest of their, with the new shield hosts. What are the shield hosts doing? All the stratagems that come with those shield hosts. I'm curious to see if they're going to keep the 4+ invul, because usually their default is 5, but if it's all Custodes, +1 to your invul.
Oh, interesting. So if you keep a core, if all of your models are from Custodes force, then you get a bonus to your invul.
Right. So that was like the big thing. So, in all Custodes, for the exception of one unit, which is weird, is a 2+ save. So everybody is, like I said, except for one unit, is 2+, 4+. And the ones that is not 2+ is, I forget the name of the unit, but it's their version of jump troops.
Oh, right, the Forge World jump troops.
Are they Forge World?
Yeah.
I don't remember, but in any case, they're 3-up.
But there was a Forge World unit that had wings, the winged jetpacks, and then there's the jet bikes.
Right, and the jet bikes are 2s, and they have better weapons than what is currently on the plastic. The big dick bikes.
Yeah.
But they're, in general, you have 2-up, 4-up across the board, and it makes them pretty hardy, and they're all super expensive. But, are they going to get an extra wound, for example, for all the custodies? So that way you have, 4 wound Custodes Guard and maybe 5 wound Terminators and, 5 wound bikes, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. Are they all getting an extra attack? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do wonder because, a lot of the books have gotten points bumps, but better models as a result of those points bumps.
Right. So, we'll see what ends up happening. I do know one thing, and I'm very happy, is that, and this is a trend GW is doing in general, is that they're starting to get rid of the D6 or the, D3 damage and just being like, no, you're 2. You're 2 damage.
Right.
Maybe 3 or whatever, but usually just instead of D3, it's just 2. Or if it's D6, it'll be like D3 plus 3 or something along those lines.
Right.
So we already saw that they're, the normal Sentinel blade, sorry, not the Sentinel blade, but like their staff that they typically use is now +1 strength, right? So they're going to be hitting strength 6 because they're going to stay as, strength 5. It's either +1 or +2. So they're either going to be strength 6 or strength 7. If it's strength 7, it's ridiculous. And then, AP3, 2 damage.
Right.
As opposed to D3, which I think is both good because you can count on it and also bad because we're seeing a much greater prevalence of -1 damage.
Right. Yeah. And so, you're not going to be able to take... if somebody has that -1 damage, I mean, if you look at all those Space Marine models with 2 wounds now, if you take away one of those, you can't take one of them. You're going to need a couple hits to be able to take them down, and I find that interesting.
True, but they also have, their new, like their version of their super doctrines, right?
Correct.
Where they can go in and say, oh, -1 damage, right? So it's 1 damage for the attack, but I get an extra attack. So if you do happen to go up against like Death Company or not Death Company, but Death Guard, right? You go into melee combat. Hopefully you're in this doctrine and you can turn around and be like, all right, I'm just going to start, it's -1. So -1 damage. So I don't care because I can subtract the damage anyway for a boost in attacks. Right?
Right.
Now, how much is that really going to matter? Because most of your units are like 3, maybe 5 men. So, 3 to 5, it's extra attacks, but.
Right. That's true. So I'm actually quite interested in the Gene Stealer cults, with some of those unique rules. I mean, it'll be interesting because now you'll have Gene Stealer cults popping up all around you. And if you get caught between 2 units, they'll get bonuses to be able to wound you. And so that actually creates some cool and interesting sort of thematic elements. If you push too deep into somebody's lines, you have to worry about kind of being surrounded by this particular army where, some armies don't really care about that. You just push forward, grab an objective. With this army, that might be a bit of a change.
Right. You would have to, but the other thing is like you'd have to basically screen constantly because they constantly have ways to, go back, underground or whatever, and then come up out of reserves. So it's like a constant, you don't know what's happening. or you don't know where he's going to pop up. They haven't shown anything that deals with their fragility, because they're like a wet tissue paper. You look at them and they start falling apart. But if that's not going to matter so long as they have enough models and units to absorb the damage, and that those units are deadly enough. So they're going to have, I think, not the problem, but like this is purposeful, that even in like turn 1, right? Depending on, I don't know much about their Gene Stealers, but if they have ways to come out of reserves or something like that turn 1, which that's an army that I can see being able to do, then it doesn't matter where you hide, which is thematic for them.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't even want to call them a glass cannon, because I don't think they have the cannon aspect of it, but they are going to be very fragile. And the hope is that they're able to jump up. They need a lot of those bonuses to be able to do enough damage to even make a single attack worthwhile, I think.
Right. And if it's all based on, okay, I have some units that are in front of you and I have some units that just popped up behind you, and that enables me to ignore your cover, and I get some pluses to wound and maybe some other abilities that they're probably going to have. Most likely there's going to be some strats that are related to it. And now all of a sudden, if I just popped up around you, I can now do some serious damage.
Right.
Great. It also tells me that, they were a finesse army before. There's more of a finesse army now, or what they will be, because you can't just, that requires a lot of planning, both planning the list as well as planning it in game of where you can make these ambushes happen for maximum effect. It's not like, say, Khorne or Slaanesh or even some Space Marine armies and stuff like that, where you can just be like, or orcs, and just be like, look, there's the enemy, everyone forward.
Right. And I think the important part to recognize is part of that is they're going to be banking on, like, well, now units have to stay back on objectives. And those units might be 5-man sister squads. It might be 5, like a small unit of intercessors. It might be, small units. So now you have to worry about keeping that backfield from them popping up and clearing off the objective and taking it. But, right, that finesse and sort of where you set up and deployment becomes so much more important with that army, that if you don't do it just right, you're gonna, you're losing the game at setup.
I agree. Or even like, because usually stuff that's like secure in the back line is going to be a weak unit that's not really going to be able to take much fire. One common thing with Space Marines is they'll take servitors. Right. Servitors, because cheap, 2-man, I think a 2-man unit, take it. They can do actions and they can hold an objective and just sit in the back and do nothing.
Right.
Keep them out of line of sight.
Yep. And that will be something that'll have to disappear. So, but
all right.
Yeah.
I think we're now an hour and 13 minutes in, roughly.
I think so.
So,
and honestly, I love talking about this stuff, and I could go on and on and on. So we should probably say, get ready to close it off for the night. We have a handful of things that are upcoming. There are tournaments going through the month of December in this area for the next couple weeks. But then, Christmas parties and New Year's happen. And then the new year will come upon us. And then I think in January, we'll get back more tournaments on a more regular basis. But then we have the Christmas Advent calendar for previews that's coming at Warcom, Warhammer Community. And I'd be remiss to not say that so many of them look like Eldar or Dark Eldar or Elfin in some way, that it sort of seems sort of holiday-ish to have a whole bunch of elf previews. You know what I mean?
But if there's any army that should get a large refresh, it would be the Eldar range.
And I didn't think that they would do a large refresh, but I mean, it looks like a bunch of different units. It does look like the Dark Reaper model has been previewed with Advent Engine for the December 3rd. It looks like that one that came out on Friday, where it was just this gigantic honking gun. That's definitely the Dark Reaper gun. So it'd be, who knows if it's just the Exarch or the unit, but that would be good. But I've always thought they were just going to do it one unit at a time. But if they released a huge chunk of old metals into plastics, that would be terrific. So
yeah,
and
I agree.
And I guess the last question that I would ask before we sort of close it up is, do you have any what are your goals as we go into the holiday season? Will you have a little time off? Do you have some plans other than getting through these Necrons that you're talking about?
So I'm actually finishing up my time off. This is the last weekend, ending a 2-week off stretch. But I'll have some time off during Christmas because the company kind of shuts down. Now, my department can't shut down entirely. But we'll basically run a skeleton schedule. So everybody in each group, you guys we all come together. We'll pick a day that we will come in to the office, and the rest of the 6 days that week we have off.
Okay.
So what I'm planning to do, what I'd like to get done by the end of the year, other than the Necron Overlord and a Royal Warden, is I'm torn between expanding my Raven Wing, painting up some models, and so that way I can change my Raven Wing list, because my Raven Wing list is my competitive list, and it's been doing fairly well in getting better, or finishing up my Deathwing list. My Deathwing list does not have enough models painted for me to bring it to a tournament, but I could finish that. That's probably going to be about 15 to 20 models that need to be painted, and once that's done, try doing competition with those instead. So I don't know yet which way I'm going to go, but I'm hoping whichever way I decide to go, I'll be done by end of month.
Nice. So in that vein, I'll close us off with my sort of plan is to finalize my sort of paint scheme that I'm going to go for these Templars. So finalize. I have a couple half-finished models painted wise on my workbench, and I want to finalize the paint scheme for my orc list, for my 2,000 point orc list. I just need to paint a couple individual models, so to get to a point where I feel comfortable with the list, just a couple characters like a mech and a couple warg banners, and then I think I'm just gonna poke away at some random stuff, like potentially assembling some Necromunda stuff, but nothing. So it's mostly going to be focused on this paint scheme because it's been daunting me. I've been watching a bunch of videos, but I've been hesitant to pull the trigger on anything. So I have to kind of commit to a paint scheme, I think.
Yeah,
so
I'd agree with that.
But we've been going. It's been about an hour and 20 minutes. I know Tony and I had talked about at the beginning when we were kicking around 45 minutes, but we just had a lot of fun talking, so that's great. So this is, we're going to call it a night here. We'll look forward to chatting with us. You can email us at goodmorningmccraig@gmail.com. And we just got a Facebook launched, and we'll have Discord, and all of that stuff will be up on the Facebook page. So feel free to contact us if you want to talk about anything. But this is, I'm Jack.
All right, and this is Tony.
And we're going to sign off. And so good morning, McCraig, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.